Hi, welcome to Spark Stories, a monthly program where we find out about the spark that inspired area leaders to step up and enact change to make Des Moines a better place to live. Today, we are joined by Diane Thacker, who is a social worker by profession and founder of ANOD for Situational Awareness LLC, which is working to create a safe environment where those with special mental and behavioral health concerns are treated with dignity and respect by public servants. Diane is also a wife and mother of 4 sons, 3 of whom deal with invisible anxiety conditions. Welcome, Diane. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Elizabeth. Okay.
Can you tell us more about the work you do with ANOD?
Sure. Okay. This is a family story that blossomed into a family business over the course of the years. My advocacy journey started when my oldest boy, Robert, was first diagnosed with sensory processing disorder. They initially thought it was autism, but it wasn't. And then the sensory part of it is when, there's textures and there's lights and there's all the environment around him that may be creating that discomfort in him. And for whatever reason, he's not able to verbalize that. So for the persons or those helpers on the outside, they're not quite sure what and how to aid Robert, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And so for me, it's been that journey to try to find those resources and those networking people that would say, yeah, I get what's happening here, and we're going to approach it this way. And yes, Diane, we're going to be right there in your corner to help you get to the next point. And that's what it's always been about. And if it hasn't been, I've been one to very, very, not sternly, but gently enough to say, no, this isn't quite working. Let's figure it out this way. So we're not so much leading the issue, we're collaborating with each other to get it to where we want it to be for that person, because the people that come together in your community say, we want what's best for Robert. Okay. So as he continued to go and grow up, one of the books that I know I'm kind of bouncing around, but one of the books that I happened to come across was Sensory Processing Disorder for Kindergartens. It was a manual. And yes, the school had their understanding of what that was, but I was a fairly new advocate in the journey of, and I knew that this was going to be the cure. And so I wanted to make sure that a voice was being heard for Robert, or that we were all on the same page of how to address Robert. Okay. So that has been the theme that I've had going from this point to Robert and all the other boys I have in my house. And my husband, Lawrence Thacker, we come from a generational line of EMTs, first responders, of police and fire and social workers. So when it comes to Michael, who's undiagnosed, and the twins that are, they have their own set of anxiety conditions, in the presence of the first responders, we have made it known. Here's who they are. This is their role. This is how we expect you to be in their presence. And this is how they're going to help you if so needed. Okay. So we discovered that when Robert was 10, we discovered that, he understood that on some level. It's just to say that when Robert was first in the presence of a police officer after he had become rear-ended, and he was totally excited about going to the fairgrounds, that whole entire situation for him changed, and his anxiety went up, 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 up. And when the officer came to help us through that, his response from Robert was, "Why are you here?" Yelling from the window. "Why are you here? What are you going to do? And take me to jail right now." And we're like, whoa, okay, that's not going to go over well, we're sure. And so, of course, the officer, who is very much trained, okay, and kind of understands a little bit about what's going on, initially was like, look, we've got to talk, you and the parents. That behavior needs to come down. Can you make him stop? And we're like, no, because he had been in a full-blown meltdown. So we're trying to talk with the officer and try to calm Robert down at the same time and trying to figure it all out. And what seemed like forever was only like maybe 10 or 15 minutes just to get to that point where calmness was going to happen. And the officer, I remember saying to us, oh, yes, oh, I have a niece like that. I didn't know whether to say thank you, I'm sorry, I understand where you're coming from. But I knew, and I talked with Larry after that, I knew we had to get a different voice. Okay, our families deal with that way to get that indication out there that something else is happening to around us or to our loved ones. And again, that's what showed up. We have to let them know at that point, because we want them to be safe, and we want to be safe, and we want to be respected, and we want to all of that to flow at that point. It's important like that. So 2 years later, in 2018, because that was 2016, I was looking at a magazine or something online that talked about non-migrator Des Moines. And they had a shout out, do you want to share your story with the police officers? And I'm thinking, what am I going to do with that? And I kind of did, but I was a little bit nervous because I'd never been in a room full of officers like that or first responders before. But I'm like, okay, whatever, let's go for it. So I called them up and I showed my story. And they said, yeah, come on over. I'm like, okay. So it was my mentor, Teresa Baumhoff, at the time, and she's still in my place, in my area, my corner. And there was four other parents on either side, so a total of 2 on either side. And I remember sitting there thinking, wow, this is amazing and cool and important, and just a whole bunch of flood of information and feelings, and thinking, wow, I'm helping the officers and their first responders to understand where we're coming from. And then there was a part of me that was like, when the other parents gave their story, mine, and I don't want to downplay mine because I don't, but it just didn't seem the level, I guess. And that was okay, because we're all at where we are. Okay. So I shared my story, and at that moment, I remember thinking, whoa, can we not come up with something that's going to help everybody in this room? And that's when ANOD was conceived. Didn't know the name yet, but that's what it was. And I remember going to my mentor, Teresa, like, hey, she's like, yeah, go run with that. I'm like, okay, run how? I have no idea what I'm doing, so it was all fun. And then 2019, as I'm running and trying to figure things out, and I don't know what I'm doing at that point, but life happens. Okay. We lost a paternal grandmother, as his mom's mom had died. And we were going through all that, and still in the back of my mind to get that voice out, because that was another stressor in our life. And we were worried, and all that was coming together. And that passion that went, hey, you need to work on this. Okay. So I did a little bit. And then 2020 hit, and I went down to the Capitol, and there was a young man there who gave his story. And he was like, hey, if I would have had somebody help me, I wouldn't have been, in this case, detained or perceived differently, or, I would have been helped. And I was like, oh my gosh, he's talking what I'm talking about. And I knew that. And that's why I went upstairs and was like, hey, House of Representatives, okay, cool. Now find your name. And I'm like, okay, find my name. So it took me a minute. And my middle son, Michael, who is our logo designer for the business, he's like, Mom, what do you want to do? And I'm like, well, I want to be able to nod to this. I want a voice to this. And we went, and you did it. There it was. A nod was now having a name of its own. And that a nod is basically when we're in that aha moment together, and you nod to me, like, I get what you're saying on some level. Let's talk about that. That's no longer me. That's your story starting. Or if you want to say to me, hey, I understand what you're talking about. What can we do next? Okay. So yes, I've been kind of bouncing around with the questions, but the focus of a nod going forward is so that when the officers come to your car or your house, you're going to have a decal that my middle kiddo had fashioned. And it's going to be a little, I don't know if I can show you the card or not, but yeah, okay, cool. So can you see that?
Yep.
Very good. Okay. So that is the decal that's going to be on your back of your window if you choose to, or your door. And as those first responders come, and then as far as the police, when they tap the car, you know, that's what they do. Some of them do because they're going to be aware of what's happening and they want to make sure they're going to be safe and know what's going on in the car and kind of give you the awareness they're coming. But what it also does is it alerts them, hey, there's somebody in there who may be dealing with something. Okay. And then they can say, in this case, Elizabeth, license registration, please. Why are you in the nod program? Because I have been presenting to the first responders and mayors and city people and, or, you know, as many organizations that I can make a call and say, hey, this is Diane, or a cold call or whatever, however it comes. Well, what I'm seeing a lot of is when there's a connection that's being made, somebody knows somebody and they're like, hey, try them. When they happen to know each other, just like with the Spark story. I mean, you and I talked about that, but it's amazing. So yeah, so it brings them back to, what am I walking into? I know I have a sense about something. The dispatchers have maybe said something. There might be tools in the car about something, but this makes it all come together. And at that moment, the voice of the guardian or the loved one, if they're able to do that, can say, I have this. Okay. And I would like it if you would help me do this or do that, or be in this situation for me. We can think about that. Okay. Also, there'll be a part of it where there's a sleeve, and no longer are we going to the left compartment. It'll be on your visor. You can take it down and you can give it to the officer and say, hey, my information's in there. It's okay for you to go back. But just be aware, for the case of my son, he might bolt out of the car, or they might start ramping up a little bit more, or, you know, it might show differently when I say my child deals with epilepsy or autism, I mean, because we understand the word, but we also know that there's a person there first and it might not come out the same way. So that's what we're also trying to convey. Do we all do this as far as those therapeutic people and those who understand? Yes, we do. Are we trained in this? Yes, on some level we are. So Diane, why is this important? Well, because it allows us to take that moment, that small moment, and say, look, we are dealing with so much. Take that pause and just ask those questions that may help take the outcome to a whole different way. Because, you know, sometimes we're dealing with those other ways that might not always help. Okay. Now, is it going to be the cure-all? No. And I don't expect it to be. I just would like it to see that this becomes another resource, another tool, another way of saying, we're here and we're here to help our loved ones and keep not only us safe, but those who are helping us as well. Okay. What else? The vision? Well, I think I've talked about that a little bit. To get it into as many hands as we can for those who are dealing with what we're talking about. And it is, when you say invisible anxiety, what do you mean, Diane? Well, I mean anything from a physical to a spectrum condition. Anxiety runs through that. And my gosh, are we not dealing with a whole bunch of that right now? Okay. So if we can make it so that the person feels safe and supported, dignified, respected, what a change that could be. This little tiny triangle. They're like, you know, I can almost hear them say, well, that's childlike. Well, sure it is. But Isn't that the simplest way of handling some of the things? Just a little light that says, hello, I'm here. Okay. Books. Oh, well, someone said, well, do you ever do meds? Well, yeah, I don't discount meds. I don't. Okay. That's for everybody. But we did biofeedback. And for him, it made a difference between night and day. Okay. It helped him Robert in this case, to shape that world inside of him that's always going. And, it worked because for him, I was told that they would, in this case, Robert would begin to have dreams. And what she didn't know was he was able to tell me, I love you, Mom. I'm like, okay, that's all, I'm sold. Yeah. And I mean, she didn't know that was going to happen, but that's what started it. Of course, then COVID has been an interesting piece of work, quote unquote. I can't even imagine what we're dealing with individually. For my family, though, in the business, it helped me to pivot to at least use the Zoom. I don't feel you. I don't see you in person. I wish you were here so I could talk to you. We could kind of check each other out. It works that we can get a Zoom and still say hi across the quad and, connect with people that, especially with those who deal with those anxieties, they need that socialization to be able to connect. Okay. So that's what we're doing. We're trying to get the connection still out there.
And very briefly, do you have some books that you mentioned one already, but do you have some books that or anything you want to mention that helps you stay inspired?
Yeah. I mean, when I was younger, there was those choice books.
Yeah. The Choose Your Own Adventure.
Yes. That I could do all day long because there's the story and aren't we all about a story? But as you go along, it says, go to page 500 and whatever that is, or 39. And you do, and it takes you a whole different path. And that's just about choices. And then you get to, okay, now you're going to go this way. And it's like, will we ever end the story? No, not on some point, we don't. Until you get to the end and it ends this way. But if you go back to the story and you read it again, it comes out that way. Well, it's okay. It doesn't mean it's wrong or right. It just is how it's supposed to be handled, right? So I was like 13, 14. And now my middle son says, hey, Mom, it's on electronics. Really? So we did that. I was like, that was the coolest thing in the world, right? So there's that. And there's a sensory book for kindergartners, the ADHD and biofeedback, because they're like, does it really work? Yeah, it does. You're just going to have to do the process and work through the journey like everything else and see the results of it for you in your situation. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your Spark story today, Diane, and the work you're doing with your own business that you founded, A Nod for Situational Awareness. I really appreciate you sharing your story today, and I hope everyone enjoyed hearing your story. Please check out another episode next month, and you can watch all of our archives on YouTube.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you.